Welcome to the BarBend Podcast, where we talk to top athletes, coaches, influencers, and minds from around the world of strength sports. Presented by BarBend.com. Today, I'm talking to Tony Gentilcore. Tony is a trainer and author who is actually one of the very first fitness writers I ever came across online. Back around 2010, there weren't a ton of places to turn to when it came to learning about the ins and outs of strength training online. But Tony's name was one that popped up everywhere, a testament to his ability to take real-world experience and translate that into the written word. Tony's probably best known for co-founding Cressy Sports Performance in 2007, and he's trained countless elite athletes in pro sports. He remains one of the most prolific writers in the entire world of strength training. In the days before Instagram, Tony helped mold the blueprint of the trainer/author, paving the way for some of today's biggest online fitness influencers. He's someone who excels at combining his real-world coaching experience with the latest evidence and research. Today, Tony still dedicates a huge chunk of his time to training clients in person at his Massachusetts studio. He's still a prolific writer with an active web presence at TonyGentilcore.com, and he's also an in-demand speaker for fitness events around the globe. I'm excited to chat with Tony about what's changed as strength training becomes increasingly mainstream, along with what too many athletes and coaches are still getting wrong when it comes to getting stronger. Here's a hint: we're probably overcomplicating things. And just a quick reminder, if you're enjoying the BarBend Podcast, make sure to leave a rating and review in your podcast app of choice. This helps us stay on track in bringing you the best content possible week after week. And if there's someone you'd absolutely love to hear on a future BarBend Podcast episode, let us know in your podcast review. Today on the BarBend Podcast, I'm talking to an old friend of mine, someone I've respected in the world of strength training and strength and conditioning since I became interested in the space initially, and that is Tony Gentilcore. Tony, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining today.
Well, thank you. It's a lovely Friday afternoon. So Fridays are my podcast days, so I'm ready and rejuvenated and ready to talk some shop. So thank you for inviting me on.
And Tony, since we first met years and years ago, podcasting has kind of become a thing. I know you're traveling for a lot of events and speaking engagements these days. What is kind of the split of your time, before we go into your background, between actual in-person coaching, which is, I know, something that is your bread and butter and something you truly value, but also being in demand to be a speaker, a guest at events?
Well, it's still pretty surreal on my end. I always joke I grew up in a very, 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 very small town in upstate New York. My hometown does not have a traffic light. It is so tiny. And if 42-year-old me ever spoke to 16-year-old me and said, "Yeah, you're going to be traveling the world and doing all these speaking engagements," like, I remember a point in my life, and I think a lot of people can commiserate, where public speaking was a very, very daunting thing. And and then now that I get invited on a bunch of podcasts and around the world to present, it's quite surreal. And now I wouldn't say it takes up 50% of my time, but I would say this point of the year, I'm usually traveling one weekend a month, where I was just in Chicago last weekend. So I did a few speaking engagements there. I head out to Europe in a couple weeks. Although that's going to be an extended thing where I'm out for 2 weeks there, but it's about, one weekend a month. Usually in the winters that kind of dies down, obviously, because I don't want to travel to Michigan in February. But yeah, the bulk of my time is still in-person coaching. And then the rest of it is, when I can, is 1 weekend a month I'm traveling and doing speaking engagements, and and doing podcasts is kind of a weekly thing, honestly. Like, Thursdays and Fridays are my non-coaching days. So those are days where I can catch up on life and catch up on other projects that I'm very good at procrastinating on, and doing podcasts and catching up on programming and stuff like that. So that's kind of the lowdown.
That time that you do have your in-person training and coaching days where you're working with clients and you're building your business in that respect, is that something you have to kind of fight to keep? Because I know I've talked to a lot of folks who, have big followings online and their careers in many ways mirror yours. And some of them just don't train clients in person anymore. It's all either online or speaking engagements or writing. I mean, have you had to have intent on like keeping those in-person coaching interactions?
Well, I when I left Cressy Sports Performance, I left there in 2015 to pursue other opportunities that were in Boston and closer to my apartment, so I could take out a 45-minute commute to and from the facility. And when I opened up my small studio, I did draw the line in the sand as far as like how many hours per week did I want to coach in person. As far as like, okay, here's how much money I want to make doing it. These are how many clients I think I need to do it to make it happen. Here's my line. Because I had to take in consideration other responsibilities. So my writing responsibilities, travel, not to mention having a wife and kid, wanting to spend time with them. So, and I came to the figure of 20 hours per week is what I want to do in terms of my in-person coaching. And, that stayed pretty consistent for the past few years, past 3-4 years. And, certainly a part of me feels somewhat guilty when I travel. Like I was in Australia earlier this year for 2 weeks. I'm going to be going to Europe for 2 weeks. So part of me feels very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want my clients to get too mad at me because I'm traveling so much. But they know it's kind of the part of the deal. When they work with me and they understand, and I usually try to make sure all their programs are up to date when I leave. And if they have any questions before I leave, they'll certainly ask it. And they of course have access to me when I'm traveling as far as emails. But all in all, it is part of my identity, for lack of a better word or better term. Actually, I've always felt that integrity is very important to me. So if I'm out there writing about how to coach people and how to write programs and how to assess shoulder function and all that stuff, I think it's important to still actually be coaching people. And this isn't an attack on those who do online only. But from my personal preference and my personal stance, I just feel staying fresh with my in-person coaching and staying sharp is an important part of being a coach. So, but yeah, 20 hours a week, certainly, it's a nice, I found it's been a nice, healthy medium. Work to life balance. It's worked very well.
And I assume most of those clients you have, 20 hours a week, those fill up pretty quickly if you have clients who are training a few times a week.
But I do semi-private as well. Okay. So it's not like I don't do any one-on-one. It's very rare that I do one-on-one training. So my studio is entirely semi-private. So I'll be working with anywhere from 2 to 4, sometimes 5 people at a time, all working off their own programs. And the space that I work out of is small enough where my eyes can be on everyone at the same time. I mean, my head's a little bit on a swivel. I feel like I'm constantly, I'm like a shark in motion when I'm coaching, but yeah, my space isn't huge by any stretch, and I can certainly keep my eyes on everyone. So even though it is 20 hours a week, I have, I think currently 25, 30 clients that are pretty consistent as far as in-person clients. So most of them are 1 day a week, but I have several who are twice a week, if not 3 times a week. So I'm usually seeing everyone at least once a week in those 20 hours.
Gotcha. And I assume most of those clients, I mean, a lot of them you've had for a while. I know you're a big proponent of not necessarily spending all your time actively marketing your services, but keeping the clients you have.
Yes. I think that is, I know later it's like, we talk about pet peeves, but not that that's one of them, but I do think a common thread in the fitness industry, especially with upcoming trainers and coaches, they're always worrying about getting those leads and getting people in the door and marketing. And that is important. Believe me, I'm not bemoaning that or downplaying that by any stretch, but I do think if you focus more on keeping your current clients happy and having a good product to give, what your assessment process, how you write your programs, and even the soft skills of coaching, I think that often, I think, it was what separates a good trainer from a great trainer, or one who's kind of struggling to get people in the door, and those who have a consistent revenue stream with their coaching, is just focusing on maintaining their current clients. And honestly, from a revenue standpoint, from a cost standpoint, it's cheaper, to focus on keeping your current clients happy and having them refer clients, rather than paying for all these marketing gurus and master classes and stuff like that. So just something to chew on for some fitness professionals. I just think keep your current clients happy and you're good to go.
So you opened your own space in 2015. Before that, and where a space where you were at for a while and became very widely known in the greater strength and conditioning community was Cressy Sports Performance. Where were you before that? And give us kind of the elevator pitch of your career across the health and fitness industry.
So before Cressy Sports Performance, I was a corporate fitness trainer and a personal trainer. So corporate fitness, meaning my first job out of college, I worked for a company who would be hired by other companies to run their gyms for their employees. So, employees would come in before work, during lunch break, after work, and they saw it as a way of decreasing their healthcare costs, which is a home run, to provide a gym for their employees to work out at, and boom, there you go. So my job was to work at those facilities and basically train their employees who were interested in doing some personal training. I did that in conjunction with being your run-of-the-mill commercial gym trainer for 3, 4, 5 years before I met Eric. Eric and I met online when it was still kind of weird to meet people online. We moved to Connecticut, worked together there, and then we moved to Boston. So I spent the first 5 years of my career working as a quote unquote commercial gym trainer. Then we opened up Cressy Sports Performance. I was there for 8 years, and now I do my own, I guess, hodgepodge of in-person coaching, online coaching, and being a pseudo, B-list fitness celebrity. So that I know it's longer than 10 seconds, but that's about as quick as I can make it.
No, I love it. And it's interesting because when I first met you, and a lot of the content that I originally read from you, and this was back in I want to say 2010, 2011, when I was kind of getting familiar with your work, and with actually a lot of the coaches, it seemed like there was this wave of kind of influential coaches that came out of the Boston area at the time. A lot of what you were writing on was relevant to and borrowing from your experience with team athletes. So baseball players, football players, team sports. And I actually didn't realize that you had that background, on the individual kind of corporate side. I, for some reason, just assumed you always kind of started with team athletics. So talk a little bit about over the course of your career, some of the differences you've learned in approaching, or maybe just general lessons you've learned approaching maybe in the coaching mindset between team athletics and the general population. And, is there a surprising amount of carryover or not?
I think that, yes, there is a surprising amount of carryover. I think when I was at Cressy Sports Performance, yes, we trained a lot of baseball players, a lot of athletes, but we trained a fair amount of genpop clients too. And I often say, now 95% of my clients are genpop. Whereas at Cressy Sports Performance, 95% of my clients were athletes. So I did do a little flip-flop. But I've honestly, throughout my career, I've always preferred working with genpop clients. And I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, I was speaking at a NSCA event, and I made that comment offhandedly while I was presenting. And then afterwards, I'm sitting in an area with Greg Knuckles, where it was like a Q&A segment of the portion of the day. And I had maybe 3 people who were at my presentation. The number one question I got was like, wow, you really prefer training Gen Pop? It was some sort of demerit point.
Regular people?
I feel you train professional athletes. Isn't that the holy grail? Yes, that's cool. But, I've always enjoyed working with Dale from accounting. I feel like I get more variety when I work with the Gen Pop population. I really get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment when I can take somebody who is very deconditioned or in pain, and can't do a certain exercises on day one, and then 2 months later they're crushing it. I get a lot of fulfillment from doing that. And honestly, like number one would be like from a business standpoint, there are way more genpop clients than professional athletes. So if I want to pay the bills, like genpop makes a lot of sense. And but to answer your question, I there is a surprising amount of carryover. I've done several podcasts, one most recently with Mike Robinson, where we kind of talked about this. And if you look at a program that I write for a professional athlete or even a collegiate athlete or high school athlete, and how I write a program or what a program looks like for a Gen Pop client, there's going to be a lot of similarities. Like the human body is the human body. I mean, I'm a big fan of training movement patterns. So squat pattern, hinge pattern, push, pull, etc. That really doesn't change. However, the obvious difference is if I'm working with a high level athlete, the load is going to be quite different. And the speed is going to be quite different. So, there aren't many Gen Pop clients coming in who I'm worried about working on their 40 time or their acceleration and doing stuff very quickly. Unless, maybe if they're Terry Tate or something, office linebacker, maybe that would be a scenario where that would happen. But I do have pretty much all of my Gen Pop clients deadlifting to some capacity, most of which are trap bar as opposed to doing a straight bar. Most of them are squatting. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a straight bar. There are many iterations of a squat that they're doing. And then, I get them throwing stuff too. Like I can have them throw a med ball. That's a very user-friendly way of training power and explosiveness and getting metabolic rate up and pushing prowlers and doing farmer carries. And they love it. Like I think, if I can make them feel a little bit more athletic, it might not be athletic, but if I can make them feel a little bit more athletic, I do find there's a little bit more buy-in to the program, where it's just not like this vanilla approach, like, oh, hey, we're going to do some push-ups, we're going to do this, which is all fine and dandy. But there's way more crossover or way more similarities and differences, to be honest.
Well, we have fantasy football season coming up, and I've heard one of the fastest growing fantasy football punishments if you finish last in the league is that you have to go through a simulated NFL football combine. So maybe you'll have Dale from accounting and some of these Gen Pop folks coming to you to train for that.
Oh man, geez. Like I don't even know what the football combine entails now. I'm so out of the loop with sports that, when you have a kid, you kind of have to, you lose the grasp of a little bit of pop culture. So I'm assuming the bench press is still involved there, but
it's the bench press. It's the vertical, the 40. Obviously, 40. I think there's a cone drill, broad jump, that sort of thing.
So it's the same. It's the same. All right, that's doable.
So if you're listening now and your fantasy football draft went poorly and you need to start training for that inevitable punishment, Tony Gentilcore, he's your guy.
We'll get you to skip well first. That's often my litmus test is like even when I work with younger athletes and especially Gen Pop is just watching them skip. Like that can give you a lot of information as far as like how long it's been since they've done anything athletic. Cause it's also a nice way to me to kind of pump the brakes. Whereas cause I do get some men and women come in and they just want to get after it right away, but they haven't really done anything remotely athletic for 10, 15, 20 years. And I'll say, just show me your skip. We're going to do some skip marches I keep a straight face. Like it's like an Academy Award level of straight faceness. But I'm just like, we have a little work to do. Let's work on that first before we worry about the more advanced stuff. But I can make it happen. So Dale, if you're listening, let's go.
And folks, I know from personal experience, when Tony Gentilcore sees something that he maybe doesn't like or he wants to have a necool face, I mean, he'll just have there's just no expression. It's just a blank slate, 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah, and then that could be good or bad, I suppose. Like. We'll see. I just don't think it's a good way to set a precedent when you're laughing at your client on day one. So straight face is probably always the better way to go.
What are some other general tests that, they don't necessarily need to be ones that you institute all the time, but you mentioned skipping as a general assessment of baseline coordination, athleticism. What are some other good ones you've seen coaches use or used yourself?
One that I picked up from Dan John that I like a lot is, and one easy way to kind of gauge progress as you go is just having them do a pharma carry for distance. So we'll pick a certain load for the carry, and I don't have a set parameter here. I just kind of like guess. We'll use 20-pound dumbbells or 40-pound, something that's challenging, and I say carry that for as long as you can before you have to put them down. So that sets a standard on day one, week one, whatever you want to call it. And then, inevitably they're going to ask, well, do we ever reassess anything? Which I'm not a fan of. Like, I'm not a fan of doing a reassessment every month or 2 months or 4 months or 6 months. Because I think any good coach that is coaching. You're constantly like tweaking the program and maybe changing this exercise or that exercise. But with the pharma carry, I find it's a nice way to say, okay, when the first day we did this, you did it for 75 yards before you had to put the dumbbells down. Now you did it for 200. So is that not progress? Yeah, it is. Okay. So it is a nice way. And to me, like, that isn't anything that requires a significant amount of skill to perform. It's just like holding something heavy in your hand and you carry. Like, I don't think anyone's going to hurt themselves doing that. And it's certainly, it's pretty intuitive.
Yeah. So, people carry groceries all the time, right? They understand like this is something with carryover. This is like an assessment that makes sense. Not everyone has, will understand like the use of a goblet squat at first, or like a hang power clean, but carrying some weight in your hands. That makes sense.
So to me, with especially with genpop, that is a nice, easy way of assessing. Another one that I've used in the past, I wouldn't say I use it all the time, and it might have even been like another Dan John, where I stole it from him. He wrote about a thing where he just asked somebody to sit on the ground or maybe standing up. I think he starts with them sitting on the ground, and he just asks them to stand up, and he tries to see like how many steps does it take for that individual to stand up from a seated position. Like, is it like this, they just cross their legs and stand up, which is kind of like the gold standard? Or is it one of those things where there's a bunch of grunts and groans and they have to roll over to the elbow and like, and get up that way? And it's like this like 5-point thing that to get up to a standing position and down. And I forgot who he referenced. But there was another coach who said, like, if we look at longevity and just overall health, joint health, and just having a life that's a lot of vitality in it, it's just like the ability to stand up from a sitting position, just crossing your legs and just standing up is a nice way of gauging that, which I found is again a very easy way to interpret to the client and say, we're just going to see how you stand up and how you get down, and we're going to try and improve that. Hopefully, as we progress, we get you a little bit stronger. We improve mobility in certain areas. We improve stability in certain areas. Get you to appreciate what it means to be like in a better position. Get you in better alignment, and hopefully that will improve as well. Then another simple and effective way of gauging to assess somebody, but also gauge it moving forward.
You talk about that test for longevity, and the thing that pops to mind is that I can think of a lot of strength athletes, and I can think of points during my own, strength training life cycle where if you ask me to get up off the ground, or if you ask them to get up off the ground, there are going to be some more grunts and groans and more. It's going to look more like a 16-point turn as opposed to like a smooth parallel park. Specialization in strength athletics often breeds. It can breed tightness. It can breed difficulty in some of those just like general moving about life avenues. Is that something that, if you're working with like a strength athlete, or if you're watching them train or compete or just live their lives, is that something that you're seeing crop up? And how are you as a trainer, when working with people or advising people or speaking, how are you fighting some of the negative repercussions of specialization?
So I think if I'm working with a strength athlete or an athlete in general, I have to recognize that there's going to be some pattern overload. There's a certain pattern that they have to perform a lot to be successful in their event or sport. And and my job isn't necessarily to fix that. Because again, if I were to look at a pitcher, for example, a baseball pitcher, they have a bony adaptation in their throwing shoulder that warrants they'll have a lot of external rotation and they'll have limited internal rotation. In years past, I remember a point early in Cressy Sports Performance's years that we would do the sleeper stretch all the time. If we saw an internal rotation deficit in the throwing shoulder, we'd be like, "Oh my God, we have to get my internal rotation back," and we do the sleeper stretch and try to fix what we deemed a dysfunctional pattern. However, we didn't take into consideration total range of motion is what matters. When we compare throwing side to non-throwing side. So that lack of internal rotation is an adaptive response to the sport, the idea of throwing a baseball, so long as they don't lose that internal rotation or they don't lose total range of motion as far as like adding external rotation plus internal rotation is what really matters. So it isn't that we have to fix that. More so than just manage it and make sure it doesn't get worse. Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's just a general example. But I think it also, if we're talking about strength athletes, powerlifters, weightlifters, etc., we'll use powerlifters, for example, because I have more experience working with them. I do feel, they are zoned in on 3 lifts: the bench press, the deadlift, and the squat. And they want to get as strong as humanly possible in those 3 lifts. And of course, their training is going to match that as far as their competition lifts and their competition stances, but also their accessory work as far as like addressing any technique flaws or weaknesses in those lifts. I get it. Certainly, the closer you get to a competition, the more honed in you're going to get. You're not going to really falter away from any of that. Like, you're basically just doing your competition lifts for a powerlifting meet. However, I would say what I have felt has worked well, particularly post meet or off season, if we want to call it that, is getting them more amplitude. So meaning getting them out of sagittal plane, allowing them to explore the frontal plane and transverse plane, and getting in more rotation and doing a little bit more reaching with their shoulders. Because, I find a lot of shoulder pain, particularly in that population, and even trainers and coaches, we tend to be pinned down. Our shoulder blades are pinned together and down, together and down, together and down, because we want to lift a lot of weight. And of course, we need to do that to squat and to deadlift and to bench press. However, the more reaching I add into a program where I can now get the shoulder blade to move around the rib cage, getting a little bit more protraction, getting the serratus to turn on, just as an example, oh my God, my shoulder feels better. Because yes, to bench press a lot of weight, you want those shoulder blades together and down, retracted and depressed, because that's a stable position. However, let's add in some push-ups. Let's add in a row where you kind of reach a little bit more and get that and get a little bit more protraction, just to get them more amplitude. So getting them exposure to varying movements and planes of motion is important as well. And it's all going to be dictated on in season, out of season, how close you are to competition, when they have to peak, all that stuff. Because certainly the closer you get to the D-Day, you're going to be focusing on those 3 lifts, or if they're a weightlifter, focusing more on their clean and jerks and Olympic lifts. So I know it was quite a little bit of a rant, but hopefully that makes sense.
I mean, my next question for you is going to be, what are some specific movements you might program for, say, an off-season power lifter to build that amplitude, to get that amplitude? And I like some of those.
Single leg work. Yeah, I mean, it's stuff like single leg work, adding in some med ball throws where we include rotation, adding in core work where they kind of have to rotate a little bit and move from the hips a little bit more, adding in more lateral frontal plane movement where they lunge to the side, or maybe they do some skipping to the side, and just stuff like that. Nothing crazy, nothing super advanced. Don't get me wrong, I still think simple is the way to go. But certainly, single leg work and all that stuff is gonna help keep their hips a little bit healthier. Their lower back's not gonna hate them as much. It just decreases overall load on the spine when we're not always putting a barbell on our back super heavy, or we're always pulling a barbell off the ground super heavy. So yeah, just trying my best to expose them to a little bit more variety of movement. If anything, from longevity standpoint, like I understand, can I make a case that any of that is going to carry over to their deadlift or squat? I don't know. But I do know that their hips are going to probably like them a little bit more. Their lower back's not going to be sticking their middle finger up to them as much. And they're going to actually be able to train because their joints aren't as beat up. That's just my train of thought. Maybe it's a little bit more simplified than most people think, but that's how I think.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Tony, it's and I prepped you for these, so I won't feel too bad. It's time for the more rapid fire questions, and that's a bit of a misnomer because give thoughtful answers if you want. But okay, let's dive right in. Your secret talent.
My secret talent. I can play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on the piano. That is my only musical talent. Is that, and I'm double jointed. So I can make the tips of my fingers bend, which is, I guess, a weird talent. But I'm very lame. those are my talents. I don't have any weight room talent or anything like that. I had a nasty fork ball in college when I was a pitcher, so maybe that's a talent too.
What is a fork ball?
It's well, you could also say it's a split finger fastball, but it's where you spread your fingers way apart so that your index finger and your middle finger are kind of going around the ball, and it's an off speed pitch, so it kind of drops off the table at the tail end of the pitch, and it's pretty nasty.
I've actually used that term to describe my life before. It's an off-speed pitch. That's all it is.
Well played.
All right, you talked about this a little bit earlier. Pet peeve.
So, are we talking pet peeves in the industry? Are we talking pet peeves just as a general life thing? What was it?
Let's go.
Just my choice.
It's your choice. This is very telling, depending on if you stick with industry or go general life. This tells the listeners a lot about you.
I brought up one pet peeve recently that most people were kind of nodding their head with, and I think I might have hurt a few people's feelings. And I wasn't calling anyone out by any means. I wasn't singling anyone out, and I certainly didn't name anyone when I said it. I have a pet peeve when I see gym owners posting videos of themselves vacuuming, it's this righteous thing that they're doing. I don't know. I don't get it. I just feel what's the point? Okay, you own a gym, you vacuum your gym floor. That's what gym owners do. So that's one pet peeve of mine. And then just kind of social media in general. Sometimes it's just a massive pet peeve where I posted something the other day about one of my coaches who wants to do a special class for the LGBTQ community. And of course, that's a hot topic. I get it. But it just boggles my mind that people go out of their way to waste 10 seconds of their time to make a nasty comment when they could have just read it and moved on with their life. It doesn't affect their life. It doesn't affect their business. It doesn't affect their day-to-day doings at all. And it's but to take 10 seconds out of your day just to write something nasty about something that doesn't involve you whatsoever, really boggles my mind. So yeah, that's a massive pet peeve too.
I'm going to start trolling all of your social media accounts.
I am not confrontational. It's just lately it's a little bit more, I'm a little bit more trolls than usual than on my end. But, I certainly don't go out of my way to be confrontational online. I don't think and maybe that's another pet peeve too, is I don't think that's a great way to, and I know there are some personalities in the industry that's kind of their thing, where they're very confrontational and very evidence based, and I can appreciate that. I think you do have to fight the good fight, but when it's when that's 100% of what you are, I do think that kind of turns a lot of people off as well. So this is a little healthy balance of figuring out what the right dosage is, but yeah, I don't. Being super aggressive is online is another pet peeve, I suppose.
Well, one that I was just giving you a gentle ribbing. One I think that a lot of people would agree with you on. It's become all too commonplace in the industry. All right, next question: the strength athlete you most admire.
So this might be one of those things where I'm also very lame. I I don't follow CrossFit. I don't follow any powerlifting. I don't follow any weightlifting, which I know sounds very sacrilegious. I think the closest person that I would that's probably in that realm that I would admire are just colleagues of mine, like Chad Wesley Smith, Chris Duffin, those guys. I just think they're very knowledgeable people, and are very open to other ideas, which I really, really respect, because I'm not a fan of fitness professionals that pigeonhole themselves into, no, this is the only way to coach a squat. It's my way. And if you don't do it this way, you're wrong. They are not like that at all. So I really respect that. And they're just two strong dudes. So and they practice what they preach, which I can definitely appreciate.
You picked some strong people and some like very, very good informed choices for someone who claims to not follow string sports.
When I saw this question, I was like, oh man, I know he's just at CrossFit, and I don't really follow CrossFit. I don't even know who won. Fraser won, and I forgot who the female who won. I was like, I don't even know the top 10 CrossFitters. I don't follow that world. And that isn't a knock. Like I appreciate what they do. I think it's cool what they do. And I can't do 95% of what they do. I just don't follow it. I'd rather watch movies.
I mean, you did pick, I think you picked between Chad Wesley Smith and Chris Duffin, you picked like two folks who have like, top 10 all-time powerlifting totals, and they're just entertaining to watch. And they both put out good stuff. We worked with both of them at BarBend.
They're good dudes. I've met Chad. I've listened to Chad present once, and Chris came to one of my workshops, which is kind of surreal, because I remember I was a room full of, I don't know, 60 or 70 fitness professionals. Chris Duffin is there, and I was like, okay, I'm going to coach the deadlift. And there's Chris Duffin who deadlifts 1,000 pounds for reps. I'm like, okay, everyone, here's how we coach the deadlift. It wasn't lost on me that it was quite the comical moment, but he's someone who, what I appreciate too is like he'll shut up and learn, which I really, really appreciate. I mean, he's a smart individual, and he'll just keep his mouth shut and just learn and take it in, and which I respect a lot.
All right, Tony, where can folks keep up to date with what you're doing, and your writing and your coaching? You're one of the most prolific fitness professionals we've had on this podcast when it comes to writing and producing your own content. So where's the best place to follow along with that?
So that would be home base. That would be my website, which is TonyGentilcore.com. And that would be my blog, social media, links to articles I've written, podcasts, etc. So that is where everything is. It's just that my name, TonyGentilcore.com.
Easy enough. Well, Tony, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been
David.
It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I hope we get to chat again in the future. Really appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.